Class evolutions in Tales of Maj'Eyal are special prodigies that can significantly alter the way your character works. Currently, there are only 4 in the game, and one of these is not like the others. Fallen was originally an entire community-made class add-on that ended up being so good that it was added to the base game, but not as a new class, but as a class evolution for Sun Paladin. And while thematically this fits perfectly, a holy warrior embracing darkness is a classic awesome fantasy archetype, mechanically almost all of your talents get changed or even removed. So it ends up feeling not like an evolution, but like an entirely new class that can, unfortunately, only be played from level 25. Fallen is heavily focused on bleed, which I feel is an underutilized mechanic in ToME. If you like stacking up a lot of damage over time, you are going to enjoy this class. Fallen is also the closest you can get to Flicker Strike type gameplay in ToME, although here it's more of a trash clearing tool rather than your main playstyle. Unlocking the Fallen is pretty easy. All you have to do is kill a hate using enemy while having the Sun's Vengeance buff, which can happen whenever you crit. If you've played Sun Paladin in the past, it's very possible you've already unlocked this by accident. All you need to do is find either a cursed or a doomed enemy that's not too dangerous, and then you spam abilities until you get this buff and kill them. In the first part of the video, I'll give an overview of Fallen's talents, and in the second part, I'll show you the character that I almost beat the game with, and talk about leveling, and why the final boss is extremely difficult to kill on this class. Let's begin with a world premiere of me talking about Combat Veteran, because quick recovery on Fallen regenerates hate instead of stamina. The value is still so small that it feels more like an insult than a real talent, but it's cool that it's different, I guess. The life regen and spell save passives are the same, but then Unending Frenzy gives you more hate from kills, and while on other classes hate can be an annoying resource to manage, Fallen has the tools to enter every single fight with maximum hate, which we'll see later, so you can still safely ignore this tree. Combat and Sun are the 2 unchanged Sun Paladin class trees. Weapon of Light is a sustain that gives you light damage on hit, not really what Fallen is about, but it also makes all your damage shields grow and last infinitely as long as you are hitting enemies. Most of the time this will not be super relevant, because if they can't break your shield, it's probably not a very dangerous fight anyways, but it's a nice bonus. You'll also notice this scales with spell power, and Fallen also has might power and physical power scaling abilities, plus there are no weapon restrictions on any talents. So there are definitely options, but most likely physical power will be your focus, because at its core this is still a class about hitting things hard with your weapon. And nothing symbolizes that better than Wave of Power, which is a massive ranged weapon attack that has a chance to hit twice based on the range. You can get this up all the way to range 10 with around 100 strength, so that is an important goal for your late game gear, because getting the double attack simply does a crazy amount of damage. Weapon of Wrath is another sustain, giving you on-hit damage, but this time it's based on your missing health, and it's packaged together with a small Thorns type effect, making enemies hurt themselves by attacking you. This doesn't end up being very impactful, but it's worth running to protect your other good sustains from being stripped from you, like for example Second Life. This sustain saves you from ever getting one-shot. For a single class point, this type of effect is incredible, and keep in mind it synergizes with negative maximum HP from your items, since it first sets you to 1 life and only then heals you. Sunray does some ranged light damage and blinds from level 3. Oh, and it also gives you positive energy on use. If you have a hard time imagining a weapon class spending a turn in combat on this, well, I agree with you. But what if it was instant speed? Sun's Vengeance passively gives you crit chance and makes some of your crits make Sunray instant speed, which makes it into a very good talent. Also, about the different types of crit chance. Sunray is a spell, so naturally it checks spell crit chance. Wave of Power is also a spell, but because it specifies that it does weapon damage, it actually checks physical crit chance. I know, I also found this pretty unintuitive, but if you're ever not sure based on the talent description, you can also look at the log where it tells you the type of critical that just happened. Path of the Sun is perhaps my favorite talent in the entire game. It simply creates a yellow line on the floor and you have instant movement speed while moving on it. This has so many uses. Most commonly, it can be used like track for information, as it allows you to safely scout any rooms. Then you can also use this talent to initiate combat on, let's call it turn 0, instead of having to spend a turn to move into vision. Once you are inside combat, it still allows for many more ways to play a fight. You can use your defensive abilities from a safe range, but then instant speed close in for your attacks, and you can do this multiple times while getting information about what's happening around the corner. It's just a really fun skill testing talent. And Suncloak improves your spellcasting speed and cooldowns for 6 turns. This is a lot worse on Fallen than Sun Paladin because you have much fewer spells, but it's still good to use before combat, since it will reduce the cooldown of talents like Wave of Power or Path of the Sun that you are going to use very early. Now we get to the unique Fallen talents. Brutalize is the usual really good weapon stun talent, but this one is unique in that it's the only one that deals less, in fact much less damage than a basic attack. In exchange for that, it is not limited to any type of weapon, and you also get to reduce bleed immunity by 50%. Thankfully, even if an enemy is stun immune, the bleed immunity debuff still applies, but 50% immunity to your main mechanic still feels pretty bad. And while it's okay that classes have weaknesses, I really wish this would deal like 140% weapon damage instead, because Fallen already has enough struggles as it is. Lunacy passively gives you spell power based on willpower and mind power based on magic. This looks like the solution to the multiple powers problem, but it doesn't give all that much, and Fallen has a problem where you want every single stat, so you have to make sacrifices, and I came to the conclusion that not putting any points into willpower is correct, which obviously makes this talent not great. Flee the Sun is a teleport that goes up to 8 range. The cooldown is not too long, so you could even use this twice in a fight. It's just really good. At least 3 points for the bigger range are more than justified. Final Sunbeam spends all of your positive energy to make a massive AoE attack that even leaves enemies dazed. This would be really good because you have talents that can quickly generate positive energy back. The catch is, this also stops you from gaining any positive energy for the next 5 turns. This means losing access to some of your important offensive talents like Brutalize or Wave of Power, or your escape tool, Flee the Sun. That makes it very hard to justify investing into this. Blood Rush is the flicker strike of Tales of Maj'Eyal. It teleport attacks a target, applying a huge bleed and a mark that reduces Blood Rush's cooldown when the enemy dies based on the mark's duration. If the enemy dies the same turn that you Blood Rush, its cooldown is fully reset so that you can just keep going. Now, obviously, if you are one-shotting your enemies with a 100% weapon damage attack, you probably don't need a Blood Rush to win that fight, but it's definitely fun to teleport all over the place. What's perhaps more important is that this is an incredible enabler of the out of phase stat, which gives you all resistance after a teleport. Together with Flee the Sun, you'll be able to keep this powerful buff up for a long time, so try to find some items with this stat. Blood Rage is a big attack that scales up all existing bleeds on the enemy. This is how you make those massive bleeds happen, and you will want to max this. Blood Bath is a sustain that makes all your attacks bleed enemies for a percentage of damage dealt. This is another core part of the bleed package, and eventually worth maxing. Bloodthirst passively gives you lifesteal. It unfortunately has a limit on it, only healing you for a maximum of 1/6 of your life per turn, but it's still impactful and it lets you live long enough so that your bleeds can do work. Combat techniques is the same, just with costs swapped for hate instead of stamina. Great gap closer, usable permanent accuracy boost, good short accuracy boost, and the very powerful global speed at instant speed. The Dark Sentry has Collapse, which is a spell that continuously pulls enemies towards a point, and I don't get why this talent exists. You are always better off either basic attacking or getting in range to attack. I did use this a couple of times to gain positive energy, but the effect is very weak. Devourer's Stance makes you recover half of all damage you deal after 3 turns. I found this not nearly as good as it might seem, because you can't use this if you are dying. You need to use this before you start dying. The timing can be a little awkward, but it is usually a massive heal when it comes in. Singularity Armor is a sustain that converts some of your damage into physical, but all of Fallen's talents that deal non-physical damage are mostly used for utility. It also slows projectiles, which is a stat that I like, but the values are not high enough to spend class points on it. For 20 positive energy, I don't think this sustain is even worth running. Thankfully, Doom Spiral redeems this tree. It's a powerful 2 radius attack that also gives you a sizable shield, scaling with the amount of enemies hit, and because Fallen has a severe shortage of good attacks, it makes this tree worth considering, even if you just want to Doom Spiral. Then there's Gloom from Cursed. It is a sustain that gives you a radius 3 aura, which is a small chance to apply really powerful debuffs to surrounding enemies every turn. The problem is, to apply one of these debuffs, your mind power is checked against their mind save. And even though spending points in this tree does give you some mind power, you will still need to make more sacrifices to make Gloom consistently work. If you can do that, this talent tree is pretty good. Weakness adds another mind power check to your Gloom, reducing the target's damage if they fail. A solid extra effect. Mind Rot makes Gloom do a small amount of darkness and mind damage. This one is fairly worthless. And Sanctuary is the one talent that works regardless of your mind power. It reduces all damage coming from outside of Gloom's 3 radius. And while Fallen is a melee class, it does have some reasons to stay at long range, like Wave of Power, so you can definitely make good use out of this. The last, and I think the most powerful tree, is Crimson Templar. Shared Agony is a damage reduction effect, similar to Sanctuary, but it is not limited by range, and it even does damage based on the reduction. Having a bleeding enemy in radius 5 is not a problem for Fallen, so this effect is basically permanent, which makes this talent incredible. And yet, Splitter Sigils is the surprising hero of this tree. It passively makes any enemy you kill leave a circle on the ground that deals a bit of light damage, recharges your positive energy while standing on it, and it constantly blinds enemies. At first glance, this might not seem like it does all that much, but Blind is a really good debuff that basically makes enemies skip their turn sometimes, and you are getting it for free just for killing enemies. Sure, you might not have the best spell power, but unlike Gloom that needs to beat a save and then only has a 15% chance to apply, here you will have like 8 overlapping circles and only one of them needs to beat the save, which makes it so much easier to apply. Also, 8 overlapping circles actually start dealing some amount of damage. Especially if you decide to become Fallen on level 25, Splatter Sigils feels crucial to help that difficult transition from Sun Paladin, and it stays great for the entire game. It also looks cool. It makes killing rooms full of enemies really fun to watch. I recommend getting this to the 3 range as soon as you can. Mark of the Vampire applies a debuff in a small area, making enemies take a bit of damage on talent use, and it amplifies any future bleeds. So this sounds really good, right? Big bleeds is what you want on Fallen. and I was sure I'm going to use this a lot, but I actually think it's pretty bad. It's pretty awkward to use. You don't really want to start with it because you want to get an enemy bleeding for shared agony. You also want to stun the most dangerous enemy, and by that point you might as well build up to Blood Rage with more attacks, instead of taking a break to cast Mark of the Vampire. It just didn't impress me, and it can be saved against. Rose Bloom heals you for 20% of the bleed value on enemies, and then puts them all to sleep for at least as long as their longest lasting bleed. I guess the vision for this talent is that you fight, you stack up the bleeds, and then you Rose Bloom for a massive heal and let the bleeds kill everything, because the enemies are harmless while sleeping. Or at least you get cooldowns back and sort of reset the fight. The thing is, Fallen already has many better options for healing, so it's really about the sleep effect, and I think I would rather basic attack than spend any class points on this. For generics, you get Chants, which are 3 sustains, each with very good effects. Sadly, you can only have one of these active at a time, but you can swap between them at instant speed. This is very important because of Chant Adept, which lets each of the chants cleanse a specific type of debuff. Because dangerous magical debuffs are the least common, Chant of Resistance is usually the best choice to auto-cast outside of combat, so that you have a physical and mental cleanse ready to go. I find the debuff cleanses more important than focusing on the chant effects themselves, because they are all pretty useful. The other 2 talents in this tree are passive effects that are barely even worth a point. Healing Light is a heal. What makes this good is that it can crit, which also makes it scale with critical multiplier, so even for a single point, it heals for a good amount late game. Bathe in Light creates a heal and shield over time zone, but you need to be careful because it also affects enemies. It also increases everyone's healing modifier, so if you have the time, it's a good idea to use this before Healing Light. Barrier is a long-lasting shield that can also crit, and it's the perfect talent to use before combat for some extra survivability. Providence cleanses 1 debuff from you every turn for up to 8 turns. When you read this on paper, it's obvious that this should be good, but the more I use this talent, the more I am getting convinced that it's just not worth putting points into. Cleansing completely random debuffs just sucks, because a lot of them are either mostly harmless or they repeat. The most common of these are cross-tier effects, which get applied when your saves are low, which on most characters is always. I think most fights in ToME are just decided too quickly for this to be great. Dirges are corrupted chants, so they function very similarly. They are 3 instant speed sustains and only 1 can be active at a time. For these, the effects are actually how you decide on which one to use, and you can get either life regen, or you can get to act more often when you crit or kill, or you can get a small shield when you get debuffed. For the mid game, I like keeping Pestilence on cast outside of combat, and then swap into Conquest as soon as I get hit with the first debuff, with Famine as the backup if the fight requires it. But later, there's more to this. Intoner passively gives you stun and knockback immunity. Free immunities are awesome, you should invest here as much as you need. Adept passively gives you fear and confusion immunity, as well as letting you keep the effect of the last dirge you turn off, so you can get 2 of these effects at the same time for quite a while. Because Pestilence has a 5-turn cooldown, you can start with it, then once you get debuffed, you can go Famine, and then instantly go Conquest to get both the health regen and turn gain. Together with the free immunities, you definitely want 4 or 5 points here. Nihilist passively gives you flat damage reduction, my favorite, but before you get too excited, without a lot of spell power, it doesn't give much. And remember, you can only start investing into this after level 25, so you miss out on the part of the game where flat damage reduction is the most powerful. It's still okay, but it's not great. In Hatred, there is Self-Sacrifice. It passively makes you gain hate every turn if you are bleeding. You can also activate it if you are in combat, which makes it instant speed, apply an unremovable bleed on you, so that you can generate hate. This tree is why the Bloodstained tree reduces the power of bleeds on you. With Path of the Sun, you can move into vision of enemies, press this, walk out of vision, rest, and do it over and over until you get to maximum hate. The same trick works on stairs. You can enter, self-sacrifice, leave, and repeat. Doing this constantly is very tedious, but it's good to know for difficult fights. During normal gameplay, you can just use this after you kill all the enemies, because you stay in combat for a few turns afterwards. Self-loathing gives you global crit chance and crit multiplier, so it's pretty good. Self-destruction is an instant speed sustain that damages you for a percentage of your maximum health every turn. In exchange, your talents cool down twice as fast and your debuffs expire twice as fast. This is clearly extremely powerful, but I didn't use this talent very much because it was killing me. But I think I overestimated the requirements. It should be possible to have enough life regeneration to always have this sustained, and that's probably the best version of Fallen. On my character, I ended up with a 1314 life, so at 8% degeneration, that's a 105 degen every turn. With Dirge of Famine and going Constitution for the increased healing modifier, that's definitely achievable. With 0 Constitution and 1 point in Dirges, I had 88 life regeneration. So plan around this talent, I think it's worth it, and it's easier to sustain than I thought. Self-Judgment is passive kind of damage reduction for big hits. A percentage of those hits gets converted into an unremovable bleed that gets reduced by the percentage you get from Bloodstained talents. This makes you drastically harder to burst down, and you can deal with the damage over time with your healing. So it's a high priority to put 4 points here. Survival is not worth unlocking, as you can find its best talent, Track, on items. So here's my guy, straight from the final boss, only this time it's in a coffin. These are the add-ons that I used. None of them have gameplay, it's just UI changes. So before we get started, something I would like to do is have this as a sort of source of knowledge about Fallen. The character vault on the website is a really good resource because you can look up a class and then look up winners and see what works, what prodigies people are taking, and so on. The problem is you cannot filter by prodigy, so the best you can do is filter by Sun Paladin, but it doesn't tell you if any of these is actually Fallen, and most of them aren't. For example, this one is Fallen, but there's no way you can tell unless you go and check out the talents. So if you have any Fallen characters that have progressed in the game, if you could post a comment with your character sheet, I will then compile all of them to a pinned comment so that people can check it out and see how people found success. Time will tell if this idea makes any sense, but I think it would be nice. And I'm going to start by adding this post by Knife Button, who, for example, went Willpower and put 5 points into Final Sunbeam. It's just cool to see different takes on a class. He also got some pretty damn good items that I just didn't. And before I show you how to level, I need to put a disclaimer here. Taking Fallen on level 25 is an incredibly stupid idea. It feels so awful that I almost quit the character on the spot when I realized what a horrible mistake I made. Because you go from being Sun Paladin, and whether you go two-handed or shield and one-handed, you will have 1, 2, 3, and like 4, 5 good attacks from these trees. And when you become Fallen, you lose all of those and get 1, 2 if you go two-handed, or literally just 1 if you're one-handed and shield, because these trees convert into different ones. So it is an outrageous nerf, but at the same time, did you really play Fallen if you were Sun Paladin until level 42 for most of the game? I don't think so. So I'm going to show you how to do it from level 25. So the best race, I think by far, is Kornak, for a couple of reasons. It has no experience penalty, so you can start playing Fallen as soon as possible. It also gives you an extra category point, which is very important, because Dark Sun, Crimson Templar, Gloom, and combat techniques are all locked, and you will want to pick up at least 3 of them. And going Cornac lets you pick up 3 trees, as well as 2 inscriptions. And you can make use of the extra generic and class points as well. For stats, I recommend Strength, makes your weapon damage better, and it is required for Wave of Power. Then Magic, it scales a bunch of your talents, and it will later be needed for one of the prodigies. Third, I like going Dexterity, this gives you accuracy, which is sorely needed on Fallen. And the last points I like putting into Cunning, this gives you some global crit chance, which is very useful. So I've played Sun Paladin for the first 25 levels more than any other class, and I've tried both going two-handed and one hand plus shield, as well as then going into their respective trees. And I think the one hand plus shield is just a little better, mostly because Guardian just has such good talents that are all immediately good, whereas Crusader has some crit synergy. The best talent is Blast, so it takes a while to get there. So I'm going to recommend going one-hander plus shield and getting an extra inscription. The starting dungeon for the East classes is by far the most difficult in the game. The final boss can just kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it. If you teleport into vision of more enemies, you're just dead. But it shouldn't take more than a couple of tries at most. Make sure to pump up your stun talent and just pray that she doesn't crit. By level 10, you continue investing into your offensive talents, and you unlock Guardian with the category point. With the generics, you mostly focus on getting some accuracy, more damage, and making your armor better. On level 20, you can unlock combat techniques. I think it's well worth it because just all of the talents are good. Fallen likes some extra mobility, accuracy is crucial, and blinding speed is obviously great, so you can start maxing it. And on the generics, I just really like getting Adept to 5 points so that it can cleanse 2 debuffs. And the light radius also feels pretty good, so that you don't have to sacrifice an item just for light radius by the time you get to tier 2 dungeons. You should try to save up some generic points for once you become Fallen. With the class points, you don't have to worry about that, because you'll get all of these points back once you take the evolution. Because Fallen is extremely weak against enemies that are immune to bleed, Dreadfell is a really dangerous zone. And I've read a tip that you can try and do Dreadfell right after the tier 1 dungeons, when you are still Sun Paladin, and after you clear Dreadfell, then you become Fallen. So I've never done this before, but I decided to try this strategy out. And because of the level scaling, it is actually possible. I've cleared 2 floors in Dreadfell, but the entire time I had an awful feeling that I'm going to die around the next corner. So after the 2 floors, I left and only came back way later as Fallen, and it honestly didn't feel that bad. I mean, you fight bleed immune enemies everywhere, and while there's more of them in Dreadfell, it felt manageable. So I'm not too sure about this strategy. I would recommend just going to tier 2 dungeons as per usual. Alright, so you've hit level 25, you mouse over Fallen, and you need 50 willpower. The way you do this is that you keep any items that give you willpower, then you put them on all together, take the prodigy, and then you can remove those items, and the prodigy will stay active. This is easy to do on Insane. From what I've heard, it is manageable on Nightmare, but on Normal, I'm not sure if this is possible, because you find a lot less rare gear, so it might take you a while to become Fallen, but that might be a blessing in disguise. The other requirement is that you need to commit a heinous act. There's multiple of these in the game that you can do, but I think by far the easiest is to do the Lumberjack quest, and after you kill the cursed boss, you just manually kill every single Lumberjack, and this horribly immoral act will allow you to become Fallen. Welcome to Hell. You get 3 attacks and splatter sigils to carry you for the foreseeable future. On the generic side, I like setting up the Dirges first, getting that stun immunity, and then you'll want to start proceeding towards self-judgment. You should also start putting as many points into thick skin as you can, which you do by saving gear that gives you constitution. For the purpose of this video, I've cheated my stats, but you continue going strength, magic, dexterity, and then cunning. By level 34, you can unlock Darkside and slowly start going towards Doom Spiral, while improving some of your defenses and the 2 best bleed talents. On level 42, your tree should look something like this, and you start transitioning into criticals, so Sun's Vengeance and Self-Loathing will help with that. For the second prodigy, I think there are 2 options. One is Arcane Might, if you just want to hit harder. That's what I took, because it felt like I could use more damage. And the other choice, I think, would be Ethereal Form. To get 40 defense, you would yet again have to do some item swapping, equip some cloth armor, and this shouldn't be too difficult to reach. But I think if you are going to go the out of phase route, which I'll show you when I talk about items, Arcane Might works better. I almost forgot to mention this, but at this point you should start feeling very powerful. You will have enough points to get Fallen's defenses online, and as you get your crit higher, your damage problems will also gradually fade away, and especially in the Orc Prides, I felt pretty unstoppable, so there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not suffering all the way through. From the final category point, from Wormbile, you can pick up an inscription. I just realized that I actually took an inscription on level 42 and picked up Darkside from the Wormbile. But I think you can make an argument for either one. I think by that point you will know if your character needs the extra inscription or the extra attack. And then you have some choices to make depending on your gear. For example, I ended up putting 5 points into precise strikes to fix my accuracy and critical chance. If you find good enough items, this will not be necessary, and you'll be able to improve Doom Spiral, maybe make your stun last longer, and get some extra bleed and lifesteal. On the generic side, you probably do max both of these eventually, because it makes it so that with jewelry, the best roll is 50%, so with these maxed, you can get to 100 with just one item. And then I would consider putting 2 points into self-destruction, maybe pumping up Dirge Acolyte, and trying to make self-destruction work. You could also, instead of putting points into cunning, put them into constitution for the increased healing modifier. If you decide to go heavy armor, which is the thematic choice for Fallen, your resistances are going to suck. And if you don't spend every single moment in combat thinking about this, it's eventually going to kill you. The way you deal with this is out of phase, and you should treasure any item that has these stats, even if every other stat on it is bad. The way I would start combat is by using Cloak of the Sun to reduce my spell cooldowns, then Path of the Sun to be able to instant speed engage combat, and then I would use the teleport in place so that I get the out of phase buff, and only then would I start the fight, usually with Wave of Power. Alternatively, you can Wave of Power and then teleport, but even that single turn could kill you, so I think this is a safer, better way to do it. And because Cloak of the Sun, the cooldown of the teleport is only 9 turns, so it's not too bad. Once the buff starts wearing off, you have Blood Rush, which ideally will always have a pretty short cooldown if you use it on weaker enemies, and if you get to a point where you need a couple of turns for one of your teleports to cooldown, this is where the Wild Infusions come in. And this is why I'm using them over any Shatter Afflictions runes, because this can give you 36% all damage resistance for up to 4 turns and let you survive until that next teleport. For 99% of the game, I ran a movement infusion, but for the final boss, I decided to go for the Blink rune to make sure I can keep the out of phase buff up permanently. Once your resistances are sorted, the next big problem you might face is getting your offensive stats in order. So that's accuracy, crit chance, and most importantly, damage penetration. For accuracy and crit chance, there are answers for it, like precise strikes. And my accuracy and crit chance was way higher. It was like 120% and over 90 accuracy. I just think when you die, if you had debuffs on you, I think it takes the stats from the moment you died, and they were lowered by something. But my physical damage penetration is accurate, and this is the reason why I failed on the final boss. this is simply not acceptable. In a world where most of the tough enemies will have 40%, 50%, maybe even higher physical resistance, you are going to struggle to kill them. I'm honestly shocked I got as far into the game as I did, but on the final boss, I just didn't have damage. Because ultimately, that's what Elendar and Argoniel are. It's a DPS check, a character check. They are both very overpowered, and a prolonged fight is not something that you want to happen. Unfortunately, Elendar is usually the one that you kill first, because he's the squishy damage dealer, whereas Argoniel is more tanky and focused on debuffs. But unfortunately, Elendar has Shivgorov form, which transforms him into an ice elemental that has a 100% immunity to stun and bleed. I was hoping that I would be quick enough to maybe teleport onto him and hit him a couple of times before he transforms, but he did it as the first action in combat, and it lasts, I think, at his talent level, it lasts for like 12 turns, and it has a 13 turn cooldown, so he can pretty much have it on forever. Which meant, with my pitiful damage penetration, I would never be able to kill him in time before Erin dies, so I decided to try and kill Argoniel instead. And I came pretty close, but not close enough. I think with a 70% damage pen, you can probably just stick to Elendar and kill him, but the problem is, because you are a Sun Paladin faction, you cannot side with the Assassin Lord. He just attacks you on sight. This means, instead of being able to craft your items, you can get items from the merchant in Last Hope, and these are entirely random. Now I think I actually got pretty decent drops. I got my weapon from the merchant, which ended up being pretty good. You can even name your items if you get them from the merchant, but despite spending all of my gold, I didn't find any items that had any respectable amount of physical damage penetration. So that's why you'll see me wearing items like this, that are just very weak, but even this pitiful 7% damage pen was important to my character. What I should have done, realistically, is grind the vaults in Orc Prides, but that's pretty boring, so I just decided to risk it. Other than that, you will want some items that improve your strength, so that you get a Wave of Power to 10 range, which gives you the highest chance for the double attack. Because you can't craft your items, I also interacted a lot more with the jewelry crafting, and this ring is crafted from a pearl. And it just happened to roll into an absolutely beautiful ring, with tons of life and life regen, 50% confusion immunity, then also had a decent Wheel of Life. This item is always fun, giving you unpredictable results. On this, I highly valued the 20% chance to slow global speed by 63%. This is an extremely powerful debuff, and the rest is just physical crit, crit multi, physical power, any accuracy that I could find, tier 3 heavy armor, because I never found any of the unique tier 5 heavy armors. From the Escorts, plus 5 strength or plus 5 magic are great. Magic will contribute to your weapon damage once you take Arcane Might. And if you find a Lore Master, I recommend taking Disarm, which is this, a slightly weaker attack that applies Disarm, making any weapon class completely harmless. Usually, on weapon classes, you have so many good attacks that you don't have time for something like this. But on Fallen, you have plenty of time, so I found this to be very useful. And for the elixirs, it's class points, then generic points, then physical crit, then you can pick up some of these stats if they are still available. And I actually ended up with the Elixir of Invulnerability that makes you completely immune to damage for 5 turns. And I hate this item because there's a lot of pressure on you to not use it too early, because I really wanted to save it for the final boss. And then in High Peak, I had a really long fight with a random boss or a unique that I had to kite all over the map, and I eventually managed to bring it down without using the elixir, and I relaxed. And against the next enemies, I just started mashing buttons, because it was just a random rare, and before I realized what a stupid decision I was making, my Revive Sustain was procced, and I panicked, and I used the Elixir of Invulnerability to fight a perfectly normal rare right before the final boss. So I don't think it would have made a difference. It probably would have allowed me to kill Argoniel, but I still would have died afterwards. but honestly it's just best to never even pick up this item, because the constant mental strain that it puts on you is just not worth it. So that is my journey with the Fallen. If you decide to follow in my footsteps, good luck, because you're going to need it. And I would love to see your character sheets so that we have a compilation of Fallens for people to look at and take some inspiration, because I know that there are different ways you can take this class. For example, because of the mind power and willpower scaling, I really wanted to make Fallen with Mind Stars and Psyblights work, but the problem is you'd have to transition into that after level 25, which just makes it way more complicated and annoying, but I'm sure it's possible with enough determination. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.